Back in the 50s, Sundays had a rhythm that you couldn't escape. By law and by culture, shops were closed, pubs kept limited hours, and the streets went noticeably still. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the Sunday trading laws that set the tone, and most people simply accepted it. For families, that quiet defined the day. It meant planning ahead, doing without, and leaning into routines that feel almost impossible to picture now. Strange as it sounds, that silence gave Sundays their identity, and it's the backdrop for everything else people remember about them. Segment 1. The quiet streets. You know what made Sundays in the 50s really strange? The streets went quiet. I mean, completely quiet compared to what we're used to now. Shops were closed, buses ran less often, and pubs only open for a few hours if you were lucky. It wasn't optional. Sunday trading laws meant that for most of the country, nothing moved like a normal day. People didn't fight it. They just went along. Honestly, it must have felt weird, even a little magical, if you think about it. And here's the thing. Because of that, life slowed down in ways we can barely imagine. Forget running out to pick up something you forgot. You planned ahead or, well, you didn't eat it. Kids noticed it most. No shops, very little TV, and radio shows that were more about talking and music than cartoons or comedy. Long afternoons stretched ahead, and somehow they learned to fill them. Sometimes that meant games, sometimes exploring, and sometimes just sitting there realizing how quiet the world could be. Even cities felt different. Parks emptier, streets calmer, church bells echoing like they owned the day. Everyone was in on it, whether they liked it or not. That stillness set the stage for the rest of the Sunday. The family meals, walks, and little rituals that shaped entire childhoods. And honestly, that's where the nostalgia starts. Segment 2. Church and community. And then there was church. You couldn't really escape it, at least not without raising eyebrows. Morning services were a big deal, not just for faith, but for catching up with neighbors, seeing friends, and just being part of something everyone seemed to agree on. Honestly, it was like the pulse of the Sunday. Smaller towns had the bells ringing clear across quiet streets. And in bigger cities, even with fewer people walking around, you could hear that rhythm shaping the day. Kids, though, not always impressed. Long sermons, endless hymns, and those moments when adults expected you to sit perfectly still. It could feel like forever. Teenagers especially would fidget, whisper, or just count the minutes. But for some, the social side made it worth it. Seeing cousins, chatting with neighbors, hearing local gossip, it gave the day texture that went beyond just rituals. Evening services added another layer. Some went for the calm, some for tradition, and some just because everyone else did. That double rhythm, morning and evening, set the pace for everything else. By the time families got home, they were ready for the next big highlight, the Sunday roast. And here's the kicker. While today's Sundays feel chaotic and rushed, back then this routine tied people together. Everyone moved to the same beat, whether they wanted to or not, and that sense of shared rhythm is part of what makes looking back at these Sundays so fascinating. Segment 3. The Sunday roast. By the time everyone got home from church, it was time for the Sunday roast, the real centerpiece of the day. And I don't mean just food. This was a ritual. The smell of roasting meat, potatoes crisping in the oven, vegetables chopped just so, gravy bubbling away. It filled the house in a way that instantly made everyone sit up a little straighter. Planning for it started the day before, because, remember, shops were closed. You didn't just run out for a forgotten ingredient. You made do or improvised. Families gathered around the table, and it wasn't just about eating. Fathers who'd been working all week finally had time to sit down. Mothers were juggling plates, managing the kitchen, and keeping kids in check. And often grandparents or neighbors joined too. Conversations wandered from serious stuff, like news from the week, to silly stories that got told over and over. Kids fidgeted, adults joked, and the whole thing had this rhythm that felt comforting, even if chaotic in its own way. And after the plates were cleared, the afternoon stretched ahead, waiting to be filled. Children needed games, adults wanted walks or quiet moments, and some families went visiting. The roast wasn't just lunch, it was a pivot. Everything before it led up to that moment, and everything after it flowed from it. Honestly, that's what made Sundays in the 50s feel like Sundays. You could sense the day had a shape, a shared rhythm that everyone moved through together. Segment 4. Children's Sundays. Kids' Sundays were a completely different world. No shops, almost no TV, and only a handful of radio shows meant they had to figure out how to fill the hours. Sounds boring, right? But it also sparked creativity. Streets were quieter than today, so games of football, cycling, or just running around felt bigger than they really were. Kids made their own fun, often inventing games with whatever was at hand. Honestly, some of the best adventures came from that boredom. Indoors, it was a mix of board games, card tricks, reading, or messing around with toys they already owned. Parents didn't have to entertain constantly. Children learned to occupy themselves. It might have been frustrating at the time, but looking back, those long afternoons helped shape imagination in a way screens and modern entertainment rarely do. Visiting friends or cousins was common too. Even then, the day had rules, church, meals, chores, but kids found ways to make it theirs. Some days ended with scraped knees, tired legs, and a sense of accomplishment from a day spent moving, creating, and exploring. By the time the evening rolled around, kids were usually exhausted, but there was a quiet pride in how they'd filled the day. Sundays weren't just about routine. They were about learning patience, finding fun in small things, and figuring out how to make the hours matter. And that's a rhythm many adults today can't even imagine. Segment 5. Adults' Sundays. For adults, Sundays were calmer but still packed with small rituals. Fathers, finally free from a week of work, and mothers, juggling chores and the household, had their own rhythm. Unlike weekdays, when life felt rushed and noisy, Sundays offered a rare chance to slow down, catch your breath, and actually connect with family. Walks were a big part of it. Some families strolled around the neighborhood, greeting neighbors and taking in the quiet streets. In the countryside, longer walks were a chance to escape the house entirely and soak up fresh air. Visiting relatives was another common tradition. Afternoon teas, casual chats, and just spending time together gave the day a social dimension that weekdays rarely allowed. It was slow, but it had its own energy. Evenings were quieter still. Some read, others listened to the radio, and a few pursued hobbies or simply rested. There was space to think, plan the week ahead, or just enjoy the calm. Honestly, Sundays felt like they belonged to everyone at once, shared across communities in a way that's almost impossible now. And while kids had their adventures and church marked the start of the day, adults used the time to recharge, reflect, and connect. That mix of quiet activity and togetherness is exactly what made Sundays in the 50s stick in memory for generations. It wasn't just another day, it was the one day that actually felt different. Segment 6. Entertainment and leisure. Evenings and leisure time on Sundays in the 50s had their own rhythm, and it was surprisingly creative. Cinemas were open for just a few hours, and in some towns, Restrictions meant you had to plan ahead if you wanted to catch a film. Radio was the main entertainment for most families. Music, comedy, dramas. Everyone gathered around the wireless, sharing jokes or tunes. Honestly, it felt like the whole house was participating in the same story, even if they were just listening. Sports followed strict rules, too. Professional football matches weren't on Sundays, so fans either played locally or went without. Children invented games in streets or parks. Adults tended gardens, went for walks, or focused on hobbies that demanded patience. It wasn't empty. It just asked for a different kind of energy. You had to engage without screens, without convenience, and somehow that made the day stick in memory more vividly. Even indoors, families found ways to make it meaningful. Reading, crafting, or chatting over tea became small rituals. Modern Sundays are full of errands, chores, or streaming distractions, but back then, the slow pace wasn't frustrating. It was shared. By the end of the day, everyone had moved through the same rhythm, in the same slow beat, and it left a mark. That mix of calm, connection, and deliberate leisure is exactly why nostalgia for 50s Sundays still resonates. It wasn't flashy. It was alive in small, meaningful ways.